Yo, big up the chat room crew as well. I can see you guys. And if you keep any questions, just throw them in there and I'll be getting back to you. Right now. Right, so first of all, out to everybody who's been up all night. I know Sashwat out there, maybe Rolando as well. A few other heads. Out to the Bass Lab team for doing this. Oh, it's a seriously big job. I think like 84 hours or whatever. Yeah, massive project. So thank you for having me on here. And out to everyone who's been on and is going to come on as well. So any OG listeners will hopefully know this one. This one's an older 420 release of mine through DANK N DIRTY DUBZ. And I'll play it through first. You can see the project. Pardon me. And then we'll break it down. Any questions, throw them in the chat room. Big up. Right, who knows this one then? Yeah, personally, this is one of my favourite tracks. This one's called Before We Started. DANK N DIRTY DUBZ, free download. Yeah, big shout out to Sashwat. He's been pushing this music from a long time ago. And hold tight the Iced Americano gang as well. Right, anyone who's throwing questions in the chat room as well, I'm going to get to them after this has played through a bit. I'll just loop this here for a little bit so we can have a little chat. Right, people in the chat room asking me a few questions. So first of all, I don't actually use Serum. I've not got onto it yet. You know what, I'll just stop it. Right, so I've just noticed a question about mixing down basses. Somebody said, let me just get this question. Somebody said, Let me just scroll back up. Sorry, guys. Let me just take it back up. I'm sure I heard somebody say, how do you mix the mid-range and the bass? So with this track in particular, we might as well use this as an example. Here, I've got 2 layers to the bass. I've got the sub layer at the top here. Turn that up. So I've just got that bottom end, and then on top of it, I've also got this layer. So if we just look at the overall master for this part, this sound is handling most of the low mids. And then I can layer it with the sub separately. Now, quite often I split sounds like this, so I've got more control over them, and this is how it helps in the mixdown process. Rather than using one bass patch and EQing it on its own, I tend to split them. Now, the sub in this track is a sub which I use in lots of different tracks, probably. I've got about 3 different subs which I've created in Massive that kind of suit the vibe of different styles, and they also sit differently with different kicks. So in terms of mixing down bass, most of my projects go like this. They have a sub end and they have the sort of low mids end. And if it's a harder sort of track, then I might have some high mids as well. And because this is quite an old project, I didn't used to sidechain back in 2014. This was, so I never used to sidechain with my kick. I do that now. Pretty much all tracks, I'll sidechain my sub with the kick to give it some more clarity and kick through in the mix, and it gives a lot more space. However, with this track, what I used to do a lot before I was really educated on mixing down and mastering, I'd just find a kick which sits well with the bass I've got. So the kick kind of sits well in this track, and usually when I'm building music, I find a sample to suit rather than sticking with one sample and forcing it to work. If I'm building percussion and the kick isn't sounding good with the bass, I'll either sidechain it or switch the sample up. So regarding the percussion, you'll notice it's very wet sounding, and anybody who's listened to my music for quite a long time will probably notice that I like reverb. I absolutely love reverb. What I didn't know back in the day was how to treat reverb in my mixdown, so I'd use reverb without really thinking of the consequences of that reverb on the sound. So rather than just using my ears, now I use my eyes as well and analyze things a lot more. And throwing reverb on, say, a snare, sometimes you're creating a hell of a lot of bottom end because of the reverb, so you need to cut that out. Way back when, I mean, I'm talking earlier than 2014, but probably in this track as well. Anyone who uses Logic, I'll find an example here. So there'll be, right, for example, this snare here, I've got this reverb running on it. It's just a standard Logic reverb called Platinum Reverb. I still use it to this day because I just think it's great. There's something called density on the reverb here, which is on 50%. And what I've learned now is to throw that up to 100, because with that density being at 50%, it's a very thick sound in the reverb. And although I used to love it, I didn't realize it was adding bottom end as well. So it still sounds nice, but I bet on the master, it's not too bad actually. But down here, these low frequencies don't need to be there, because at the moment, regardless of this snare, I've got the kick here, I've got the bass here, I've got any other filler sounds possibly doing little bits here. I don't want any snare there at all. So these are the things I would change now if I was remastering this track. So I'll check some questions in a minute, but overall, most of my tracks work in the same sort of arrangement. I have my percussion at the top of the arrangement and all together, and then I'll have synths and stuff underneath it. Most of this is bass. There's a few synth layers in there. And then further down, I've got my effects right at the bottom, any sort of ambient effects, fillers. And then in this case, I've got the vocal from the track, and that's spanning across. Let's have a look. I mean, even though when you listen through to this track, it doesn't sound like there's like much vocal. There's quite a lot of processing going on here. So I've got the main part of the vocal.
Trying to forget about. Baby, I knew the end before we started.
Now, just a little bit of history with this. Before I started to produce dubstep, I used to produce more house music, in particular speed garage music. And this track here, which I opened up, this is an absolute classic sort of speedy G track, especially in Birmingham, in the UK. I'll just play it. So that vocal there is the vocal I used in there before we started. But I just cut a little bit out of it. And then when it drops, I made a hook out of part of the vocal I used. So this is the hook.
Trying to forget about. Baby, I knew it. Trying to forget about. Started. Trying to forget about. Baby, I knew that. Trying to forget about. Started.
So you'll see the main layer here is the vocal in its regular pitch. And then these different layers have got different pitches on them. So I've pitched this down by 2 overall in the whole track. The actual normal pitch of the vocal is up there, but I wanted it down a little bit. Gives it a little bit more soul as well. And then these layers down here have got different pitch shifts on them. Now, I'm using pitch shifter here. I haven't used pitch shifter for several years now because I use Waves sound shifter, but I didn't have that back then. And this still does the job, but it's the Waves sound shifter is way better, so I'm using that one mainly now. Then below the vocals, we've got the effects. Most of the effects in the track are very thin and just ambient, so just clap shots, and none of these are going to be taking any space in the bottom end because I just want them to sit on top of the music and just create some ambience. So that's everything with this track, really. All works together. Now, the synths, most of the synths, I think, are in Absinthe. So, yeah, they're all in. I absolutely love Absinthe. I've got to big up Native Instruments for making just quality VSTs and software. So that's the main melody for this track. So that kind of runs through in the sections of the track. We've got this choir as well, which is in Absinthe. I just love the sounds. They're so like dreamy and kind of twisted in parts as well. And then this section of the track is the sort of classic ENiGMA Dubz bass, which I go to every so often. So that sounds just so nice to listen to, and there's been quite a lot of older tracks which I use a similar sort of vibe with. And once again, I've got it split. So that part of the bass is handling sort of like the low mids and the mid range, and then underneath it, hopefully you guys are listening on decent speakers or headphones so you can hear that. And then in between, there's these kind of fillers as well, which sound like they'd be some darker sort of track, but they work in this. And then all together. And then you've got these fillers in between. So all the synths on top of the bass are just very ambient and floaty. Right, there's a pretty cool trick down here to show you guys as well. Anyone who uses Logic, it doesn't have to be Logic, I'm sure you can do this in other programs. There's a little trick that somebody taught me some time ago about reverse reverb. You might already know this, but here we go. So the normal, the synth sound there, there's something called Space Designer on Logic, and it allows you to reverse the reverb here. So if I don't have it reversed, this one here, if I listen to it completely dry, that's the synth sound. And what you do, you reverse the reverb, you take all the dry signal off and just have the wet, and it creates a swell. And then you control the length of it depending on how long you want that swell to last. So at 2 seconds, I know I worked out basically that if I start it there, it will actually match up to this one perfectly and they'll link together. And that's a really cool trick to use in all music. I do a lot of more commercial stuff under different aliases, and it's really good to use on vocals because you'll realise any sections where there's no vocal, before another vocal comes in, throw a bit of reverse reverb before it, and it will just transition really nice. So those are most of the layers with this track. I've just seen somebody asking me, somebody was asking how I cut the vocals off that track. So with this one, this is a free download, and anytime I do bootlegs, they go out for free. I don't sell tracks which I don't have the rights to, really. This is an a cappella, which I already had. I've got an absolutely massive pack of a cappellas. You can find them on forums dead easy. I think I got this pack off the Dubstep forum. Who remembers the Dubstep forum? I'm talking probably like 8 years ago. So that was a full vocal there.
Trying to forget about.
This is how it was normally.
Trying to forget about ordinary things, typical, predictable.
Out to Deborah Cox.
Baby, I knew the end before we started.
Bad vocal. Absolutely sick. But I didn't want to use the whole vocal because I didn't want it to be bait. So I just used some cuts out of it to make a hook.
Trying to forget about.
And I've also processed that with reverb and echo and compression.
Baby, I knew the end before we started. Trying to forget about.
So those are the main cuts that I used for the actual track. And then there's these sections of the vocal here behind it.
Baby, I knew the end before we started.
So what I did there is, as you can see, I got the full phrase and then cut the end off it and put it in a new channel and added an echo just to that part of the vocal, so it sits 1/2 every half a bar. It echoes off over the track. And there's this part as well, which has got a slightly different time on the echo there. It's got a dotted one. Yeah, so most of the time I'll use an acapella I've already got, or I'll just be really naughty and like rip one off the internet or something, if it's a bootleg or just a little sample in there. And that's this track really, that's how I broke it down. I do absolutely love playing this one out still to this day because it's got a real energy to it and the bottom end is really warm as well. The other thing in this track which is going on behind the percussion are some sort of percussive loops. So you got that one there, which is kind of like a bongo thing. It just gives it a bit of flow. And now these shakers are in Logic as standard, the Africa Seed shakers. I've used these for years. Lots of ENiGMA Dubz tracks have got those shakers in them because they've just got a really nice texture to them and they just kind of fill out the track. Yeah, so anyone who's chatting about the reverse reverb in the chat room, if you haven't got a plugin that does it, you could create the same thing by getting a sample. I'll do it now real quick. Any program you're using, you'll be able to do this with. So this sound here, I'll duplicate that. It's got a real heavy reverb on this, 17 seconds. So I'll put the reverb on, I'll take the echo off. Now if I extend my timeline at the top until the reverb stops, about there. Now what I could do is I could bounce this in place. Let it do its thing. And then once it's bounced in place, it'll turn that into an audio file with the reverb on it as well. Here we go. Right, so there's the audio file. If I cut that, I know it hasn't finished reverb in there, but I can just tail it. Now, I'll get rid of that. Double click on it. Go to File, go to Functions, Reverse. Now, I've technically done the same thing that the plugin has done, but just done it manually. So that is the reverse of the sample. So now if I play that before the sample that comes in there, I could even cut it here if I don't really want it to be going for so long, but because of the nature of this track, it wouldn't really mind because it would just add a bit more ambience. And I can fade it right up. See, my pointer is here in Logic. This is where you fade your audio in and out. And here we go. And that actually sounds even better than what I did with the reverse reverb, because you get this nice bit just before where the actual sample starts to decay before the reverb comes in. And that sounds great. So there you can do it that way as well. So yeah, give it a go. Give it a go in your projects. And you can use that before anything you want. It's really nice to do it before snares as well, because it gives it a nice hit just before the snare comes in. You get a bit of like a sort of texture that comes in prior to it. So yeah, that's a little tip. I'm trying to think what else I've done in this track which is worth it's worth going over. I've got a couple of others actually. Let's go to, right, so I've got High Grade, or I've got Exodus, Bob Marley, Bootleg. So is there any preference to which one I open, or should I just go ahead? Let's see what people are saying. Yeah, also out to everyone who's locked in and anyone who's been donating as well, because it's amazing to see people doing this. It's obviously all going to the artists. I mean, I'm thinking of throwing my money to the team at BassLab for doing this, because the amount of hours that have been spent setting this up, I mean, it's amazing. So big up everyone at BassLab for doing this. Right, Exodus. High Grade, Exodus. Right, there are more people saying Exodus, I'm afraid, so I'm going to open it. I might do both. I might just fly through this one. Or I'm not going to save. See you later. Also, this is the start of more weekly regular live streams. So, BassLab's still going for another day after this as well. It's amazing. And after that, I'm going to utilise my Twitch a bit more. Right, so this is the Exodus. Now, so these projects I haven't actually opened since, so this one was, what, 3 years ago? So they might be a bit messy, but usually, as I explained earlier, there you go. You got all the percussion at the top. You've got sounds and synths in between, got all the effects at the bottom, and then the vocals. So I actually had the acapella for this anyway in that massive pack I've got. It's got thousands of acapellas in there. So let's just... Right, I'll just let it run through a little bit to familiarise everyone with it. Oh yeah, to whoever's set up Impasta in the chat room. Imagine if I changed my name to Impasta now. I eat so much pasta as well.
Men and people will fight you down. Tell me why.
Out to DANK N DIRTY DUBZ as well. I do have a Twitch set up already.
Send us another
And that Twitch is ENiGMA Dubz official. So go and follow me on there because there's going to be regular streams coming. Actually somebody called Impasta, that's amazing. I've never come across Impasta. And hell yeah, pasta is delicious.
Men and people will fight you down. Tell me why. When you see each other. Let me tell you, if you're not wrong, then why? Everything is alright. So we gonna walk alright through the roads of creation.
Right, I've seen somebody asking about copyright issues with things like this. So, as I said earlier on, sometimes if I do bootlegs, which I don't do too often, but sometimes if I just love an original and I want to put a spin on it, I'll just put it out for free. I won't sell it. And then if I do have any issues down the line or get contact from the original artist, I'm just happy to take it down if they're not happy, but I'm not earning anything from it, do you know what I mean? So as long as I don't upset anyone, hopefully. I mean, you might end up upsetting somebody, but if you're just trying to be expressive and you just want to put your touch on something, throw it out there for free and hope one of the socials doesn't take it down for copyright reasons. Yeah, so regarding copyright as well, the risk is very low if you're not doing some major sort of commercial release, and then it's obviously then you got to think, is it worth clearing the sample? But as I said, this wasn't released, so this has earned no money at all. This is just a free download. DANK N DIRTY DUBZ. This was a 420 track. So there's actually a lot going on in the vocal in terms of the layers here. I've been producing and engineering for over 10 years, so luckily for me, I kind of know Logic inside out. So there's quite a lot of layers all together. And what I tend to do is anytime I want to process something differently in Logic, I put it on a different channel. Even if it's the smallest change, even if it's something I could have done with automation, I like to do it as a separate thing in the arrange window, because then when I'm looking at the project while it's running, I can see what's going on without having to open up the automation all the time. Fortunately for me, I've got a pretty strong, powerful iMac, so it lets me do that, because there's quite a lot of channels on most projects. And a lot of these parts are in the actual vocal already, and they're just begging to be used with extra echo and reverb and stuff.
Open your eyes.
So these are all cuts which I took from the actual acapella. So if we listen to bits like this without any processing, they might be quite dubby already, because being like a more reggae dub record.
Exodus.
Oh, there we go. Right, that didn't need to be there. So that's the original sample there.
Exodus.
So I've pitched it down.
Exodus.
Compression. Now the cutting the bottom end all out because I want it to be really thin and sit on top of the mix. I don't want it to be muddy. So the reverb on this is completely wet. There's no dry signal whatsoever because I just want it to be really floaty. And then you've got echo as well. So anyone wanting to make sort of dubby, reggae style tracks, reverb and dub are kind of key to that because these are the techniques I'd use in the dub tracks as well. And it just gives it that sound straight away. Just remember to be mindful of reverb and what you're putting it on. You don't want to really put reverb on kicks unless you're treating the sounds around it to work with that reverb, because anything low frequency with reverb on is just a real problem when it comes to mastering and mixing. Whereas these sounds are all in the higher register of the frequencies, so they can just sit on top. So we got here really nice pad in Absinthe. It's got that sort of retro, almost 80s sort of vibe to it, which I tend to resonate with most. And then Spectral's a really cool VST. I've got this. Now you can only just hear that at the moment because it's filtering in on the intro. And that sound runs all the way through and it's very dubby, the sound is anyway. It's just like a pluck. And then on top of that you've got it's almost like a guitar, like a plucked instrument. And then you've got these synths further down. So in this part of the track it goes a lot more stripped back, and I've got my classic ENiGMA Dubz sort of Reese bass, which I've used for many years. Hopefully you guys can hear that alright. I've just noticed that's panned really far to the right. Wow. And then layering that with that pad. Just a lot of power with that. So if we listen to that without all the vocals, I'll just quickly, just bear with me, I'm just going to sum all of these vocals. So what I'm doing here is I'm just grouping them all together into a folder, and then I can just mute the lot of them in one go. So it's real deep, that section is, because I've got all the pads running with it, so I didn't want much going on in the bottom end apart from the sub, because it gives the synth some space then. So what I've done here is I've got no low pad, it's just about the bass and it thins out a little bit. And then I've filled it. If you can hear that through your speakers or headphones, there's just a little LFO. There's like a filler of the sub which is working in between the Reese. And also what you'll be able to notice is on top of my sub, which is just a typical sub, there's a bit of noise in Massive. Anyone who uses Massive will know it. I like to have white noise on top of my sub because it just gives extra texture in the mix. It doesn't like muddy anything up or cloud the mix in any way, but it gives it texture. And then that's running through the LFO, which is over there, which I've got on the actual main amp. Which gives the track movement at that point. So with this whole track really, there's not really much that... There's no bass really with character. It's mainly to carry the track through. It's all about the synths, and it's a much more musical track. The percussion There's a really nice like percussion hit in there. I think it's this one. That one, I just love that. It's like a sonar. It's actually clipping massively. One thing I've noticed with Logic over the years is you can really push the master without it really affecting things. But as I've said before, since I've made this track, even though this was only 3 years ago, my master and mixing has come on. If you think I've been doing this since I was, 17, and I'm 31 now, mixing and mastering is not something that you just get. It's, for me, I think it's the hardest part of the process, because if you end up looking too heavily into mixing and mastering your music, your creativity sort of gets pushed down and it turns into more of a chore. So in the past, I used to just get my ideas down as fast as possible while I was buzzing about it. And then afterwards, I'd then think about the mixing and mastering. And half the time, like years and years ago, I wouldn't even think about it that much. And it depends on what you're using. I didn't have the speakers that I've got now. Now I've got some really good Genelec speakers, which I've been able to afford by saving up for like several years. So now I'm starting to really knuckle down on mixing and mastering. And also regarding plugins, I can't recommend enough FabFilter, because their plugins, they're not that expensive and they're absolutely great. So those are my go-to plugins for mixing and mastering. My current mastering chain now for all projects is all FabFilter stuff: FabFilter limiter, multiband compressor, EQ. But to be honest, I still use the Logic standard EQ all the time because I just know it inside out. So out to anyone who is using Logic or any program, you'll always see people talking about Ozone, other plugins, spending money. It's like, just learn to use what you've got, because you can still get the same results. Most of the plugins I'm using, if you look across my channel strips here, these are all standard Logic plugins: standard echo, standard reverb, standard EQ. You'll just get the occasional one. And that, looking at this track, the only thing which I've used outside of Logic is the sound shifter, which is from Waves. I used to use the standard Logic pitch shifter, but the Waves one is definitely better, so it's worth investing in because it's not even that expensive. And then on the master here, the only outside plugin outside of Logic is the FabFilter. So any question, should I say, regarding this? What people saying? Out to everyone, a lot, by the way. It's Bass Lab. You got 2 more hours after me of different production classes, and then it's back to the live stream from DJs as well. Right, someone said, would you recommend using headphones or speakers while making good music? What's more important? So, right, for me, I used to think that headphones were the way to go. I used to have KRK Rocket 6s, and I had them for about 6 years. And I thought they were great, and that's what I could afford, and they did me really well. I had them for what, probably 8 years, maybe 6, 7, 8 years. Eventually, I invested in the Beyerdynamic headphones. Now, I've got these, which are the 770s, and behind me on the desk over there are the 990s. Now, I actually prefer the 990s, but they're open back. So in situations like this, when I'm recording with a mic, they're not the best because the sound comes out the back. But I absolutely love the 990s. And for a couple of years, I used to use those mostly and then reference afterwards in the car or on my speakers. However, since I've been able to invest in the Genelecs, I've got some 8050s. They've changed my perception completely, because I'm actually hearing a lot more from them compared to the KRKs. And now I've realised that speakers are, for me, they're imperative. I need my speakers, especially when I'm mastering, because I work as a mastering engineer as well and doing mixing and mastering for various people. And I really need my speakers. Even if you know your headphones, having such close contact for music, and over time your ears get fatigued very quickly because it's so direct. Obviously, if you're producing really loud for your speakers, you're not helping yourself either. But I would recommend, personally for me, both. It's important to have both. Obviously, I've got these headphones, the close back, because if I go on a flight or on a train somewhere to a gig, I can still do my work, which is great. So both if you can. If you can't afford monitor speakers, get some decent headphones. But just learn what you've got, because even if you haven't got expensive equipment, if you learn it and reference, it's so important to reference. Even if you think you've got the best track and it sounds absolutely mint, go in the car, go on a hi-fi, listen through your phone. You need to just listen to as many different devices as possible, and also give your ears time to rest. I can't even explain the amount of times I produce music and put it out there the next day, like early, way back in my career, because I was just buzzing. Whereas now, I'll sit on a track for weeks, and I try and get ahead of myself so I can do that, because I can guarantee in, say, like 2 weeks' time, I'll revisit that track and remaster parts of it once my ears are new to it again. Once your ears get used to something, it's very difficult to be critical. And the other thing I learned is it's quite difficult to master your own music. When I did my Dublock release, the Eyes EP, I mastered that EP myself, because I do the vinyl mastering for Dublock. And yeah, it was an absolute nightmare, because I couldn't get the track to sound better than I already had it in my own head. So it took me a while to step away from the track and come back to it outside the box. It's really difficult. So, but yeah, I might be ranting a bit here, but yeah, I just noticed someone say thoughts on sub packs. I've not actually ever used one. I'd love to use one and try one out. So for my 990s, I'm running them through a Scarlett. So I've got a Scarlett 6i6 interface. It's nothing fancy, but it's done me well for over 6 years now. That's my next investment, to invest in a better interface. But at the moment, I just can't afford to. But yeah, it does the job anyway. So yeah, somebody's saying they're relating to the FabFilter love. Yeah, FabFilter plugins are great. I think I grabbed the whole mastering bundle during Black Friday. I'll send you my broken one. Sub pack. Yeah, someone sent me. Yeah, I'd love to try sub pack out. Right, merchandise as well. Someone's asking about merchandise. It's in the works. We're getting sort of prices, and we're getting it sorted between me and management. Out to Subcon, out to Brandon. That's my management team. Big up, guys. I'm going to open. Now, I'll ask you guys, which one would you like me to open? Would you like me to open High Grade to check that out? Or would you like me to open my next single? Because nobody's heard this yet. And it's going to be coming out next month. So I can open that project if you want for a sneak peek. Someone's asking what I do with my drums to make them pop. Mainly compression. Compression is key to getting things to pop. And distortion, possibly a bit of saturation. But the other side of it is use a really good sample to start with. Because it doesn't matter how much work you do on a sample. I mean, you can do a hell of a lot of work to get a sample to sound great at the end. But if you just use a really good sample to start with, you don't have to do as much hard work. Yo, it looks like the single's the one. Right, this is going to be out next month. This one's called Clarted. Right, has anybody seen the film Sinister? Because if you have seen the film Sinister, that film is how this track began. It's not as the track isn't as dark as Sinister, the film, but anyone who's seen Sinister will know there's a scene in that film which is called the lawnmower scene, and in the background there's a really, really sick Reese bass, like an atmosphere, which is in the film. And ever since I saw that at the cinema, I knew that I was going to sample that one day. So this track, I'll just open it quick. I'm actually going to do a full video on a breakdown of this sound and how I actually how it came into the track. If I take the processing off, let me just right, that sound there. I'll play it again so you can hear it. In the film, that sound just runs behind the scene, and it's so eerie, it's sick. Absolutely love it, that sound. So what I did is I processed it. First I EQ'd it, so there's no bottom end. bit more presence in the low mids. I've boosted up here because there's some very, very slight frequencies which just sparkle a little bit up there. Then I compressed it. So you can tell straight away that's coming through hard now. Very hard compression on that. Then I trashed it. This is a great plugin. I can't recommend this one enough. Out to Booker's Finest, who threw the link on Facebook some years ago because this was on sale for $30. See, listen to that now. Take it off. Put it back on again. Sick plugin. And then further EQ, even more of a cut. So that's without. This is with. Now you're getting a load of presence now in the top end, which is just like cutting through. And then even more. So you've probably noticed that I've got 3 different EQs on the same sound. But rather than doing all the EQ through one EQ, I like to split it and turn them on and off so I can hear what I'm doing. I tend to do that on my mastering as well. I tend to have different multiband compressors handling different parts of the frequencies. So that, say if I've got a chain in my master chain, I might have 3 multibands. The first one's for low frequencies, the second one's for mids, third's for high, and then I can visually know what's doing what as well. So that's just something that works for me anyway. And then at the end, there's a final compressor. If I look, yeah, the final compressor is side chaining with the kick. So I'll just put the kick on now with just that sound. Now with the compressor on it. Now, if you've heard that as well, you can hear it's opening up. So I've actually got one of these EQs. I've got one of the, let me see which one it is. I think it's the last one. Yeah, this EQing is actually automating, so it comes open. And you'll see it open up now and change. Frequencies also shifting as well. So then that sound I've layered with another bass. So that bass underneath is just like a low Reese. Now this will be side chained as well. This is something I've been doing for a couple of years, a lot more now, side chaining, especially between bass and kicks. Right, I'm going to play the track from the start. Yeah, this one's heavy. that's all you're getting for now. There was a quick question I saw from Demur as well in the chat, asking me how to tame the frequencies on trash. So what I tend to do a lot more nowadays is use multiband compression rather than EQ. So say there's a part of the frequencies which are troublesome, I'll throw a multiband compressor on it and just set the threshold so it only kicks in when there's a problem there. So I'm finding multiband compression to be like my answer for a lot of problems which I used to have and used to try and use EQ. Whereas obviously with a multiband, it works in real time when you set the threshold rather than it being a constant sort of either boost or cut. It just does it when you ask it to. So I hope that helps a little bit. Yeah, this one's nasty as well. I can't wait to put this one out. It's been done for a couple of months. So most of the sounds in this aren't in VSTs. They're all 808 samples. So the actual bass in... So that sound itself, the first sound that comes in is a sample which I've messed with afterwards. And it's got a lot of processing on it. You'll see it down there. I've got all that going on. So if I turn all this off, it's literally that. It's just an 808 kick with a nice hum to it. So first, I've EQ'd it quite aggressively. So I'm getting that mid-range coming through. It's got a nice hum to it. After I've EQ'd it, I'm throwing a compressor on it. Just to squash it even more and give it some punch. Then I'm guessing, yeah, this is a sidechain on the kick itself. Apologies for the messages popping off. Then I've got tremolo. If anyone doesn't know what tremolo is, you've probably got it in all your plugins, different names. I think there's one called LFO Tools. I mean, you just set a shape to the note. So this is 1/4T, which is triplets, and it's just shaping it. So you'll hear it now. It's almost like putting an LFO on a sample, but this is just a standard Logic plugin, but it's worked well for me for years. That's without, that's with. And then finally, even more aggressive EQ. And then on the bus, I've got trash doing its thing with reverb and echo. So this is without all that. And then this is with all that stuff. So it's just turning it from an 808 into a very distorted, just like layer. There you go. And then there's more 808s. And there's a lot of samples in this one. I've got this sick jungle sort of Reese. That's there as well. And I've got these sort of detuned 808s, which is very jungly here. These. For years and years, I used to hear those sort of sounds in tunes, and I never knew how to make them. And then I realised you literally put two semitones next to each other and you get dissonance. But because it's a bass, in the certain frequencies, they wobble and they resonate against each other. And the lower you go, because of the frequency and the nature of sound waves, the wobble lasts for longer, because the lower the frequencies, the longer the wave. If I bring that down even more, you'll hear it goes even longer, the wobble. It just sounds awful down there. So very quickly, somebody's put, do all those EQ boosts mess with the overall gain? That's where you compress afterwards. So you just make sure that you've got some sort of compression after, or a limiter after all your EQing, and preferably don't clip before that as well to keep everything clean. Right, listen guys, I'm afraid I've got to go, but keep an eye on my socials, because I'm going to be doing weekly streams, and it's going to be like this every time. I'm not going to be doing DJ streams. It's just going to be production based. So thank you very much for having me, Bass Lab. And guys, keep it locked and stay safe, stay at home. Much love. Big up.